One man was terrorizing the railroad track-adjacent communities of Texas and the rest of the southern U.S.
The nation's railroads become the conduit of a killer. He strikes at random, then disappears. Recurring clues tell police they face the worst predator of all, a ritual serial killer.
The whistle of a distant train once signaled opportunity, but for many, it became a harbinger of unimaginable horror. Stakes. How could one man inflict such widespread terror, slipping through the grasp of authorities for so long? Storytelling? This is the story of Angel Maturino Reséndiz, the railroad killer, whose brutal legacy etched fear into the heartland. The year 1998 brought a chilling escalation. In the seemingly safe suburbs of Houston, Dr. Claudia Benton became a victim far from the usual railway-adjacent targets. This brazen act, the physical evidence left behind, and the subsequent connection to earlier, seemingly disparate crimes began to paint a horrifying picture. The realization dawned: a serial killer was traversing the country by freight train. The brutal nature of Benton's murder, the sexual assault, the calculated theft of her vehicle, it all pointed to a dangerous, escalating pattern. The discovery of her abandoned Jeep in San Antonio, coupled with fingerprint evidence, finally gave law enforcement a name: Rafael Reséndiz Ramirez, later revealed to be Angel Maturino Reséndiz.
In the master bedroom, they found the doctor. She had been brutally murdered.
The forensic evidence from the Benton murder became the linchpin, connecting him to other brutal slayings across state lines. The DNA recovered linked him to the Kentucky attack on Holly Dunn and the murder of her boyfriend, solidifying the terrifying scope of his crimes and placing him squarely on the path to a death sentence. Behind the cold steel bars of death row, Reséndiz became known by a chilling moniker: the Choo-Choo Man. Even in confinement, his mind remained a disturbing enigma. He confessed to more murders, boasting of his dark deeds. In a bizarre twist, he even attempted to profit from his notoriety, trying to sell his autograph and even strands of his hair. As his execution date loomed, a competency hearing was convened. Reséndiz claimed he was half man, half angel, and immortal, a desperate attempt to evade the ultimate judgment for his heinous crimes. His original execution date was postponed so that a competency hearing could be here. Angel described himself as half man, half angel. He believed that 3 days after his execution, he would awaken in the Middle East and help the Jewish fight. The legal avenues dwindled, the appeals exhausted. The date was set. Outside the prison walls, a stark division emerged. Those who believed justice demanded the ultimate price, and those who opposed the state's power to take a life, even one as stained with innocent blood as Reséndiz's. Inside, the final preparations began, a stark ritual preceding the irreversible act. June 27, 2006. The day arrived. Reséndiz declined a final meal. His last visitor was reportedly his daughter. As the hour drew near, tension hung heavy in the air. Strapped to the gurney, Angel Maturino Reséndiz offered his final words, a jarring mix of seeking forgiveness and a bizarre claim of being deceived by the devil. Present to witness his end were family members of his victims, their faces etched with the pain he had inflicted. Their statements afterward echoed the profound loss and the closure, however incomplete, that his execution brought. Officials spoke of the end of a terrifying chapter, a testament to the relentless pursuit of justice.
I damage people that I have a reason, or I have concluded a reason, and I have a clear conscience in it.
The execution of Angel Reséndiz ignited a renewed debate about capital punishment. The complexities of mental illness within the justice system and the long-lasting trauma inflicted on communities terrorized by his crimes. For rural Texas, the sense of vulnerability had been profoundly shaken. The once unthinkable reality of random, brutal murder, now a part of their history. The railroad killer became a grim reminder of the darkness that can travel unseen, leaving scars that time struggles to fully heal.
I eventually covered his execution, and even to the end, he didn't show any remorse towards the victims. Truly, the most evil person I have ever met.
Those who witnessed his final moments recounted a chilling scene. The prayers in a language foreign to many present, the unsettling lack of profound remorse until the very end. For them, it was the final act in a long and horrifying drama, a confirmation of the evil they believed resided within him. The sterile environment of the execution chamber stood in stark contrast to the brutal chaos he had unleashed across the country. Yet in that final moment, some sought a flicker of humanity, a sign of understanding the devastation he had caused.
I damage people that I have a reason, or I have concluded a reason, and I have a clear conscience in it.
The story of the railroad killer serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of safety and the long shadow that violence casts. It highlights the crucial role of interagency cooperation, the evolving science of forensics, and the enduring impact of such crimes on both individuals and communities. While justice was ultimately served, the echoes of his victims' lives, brutally cut short, resonate still, a solemn testament to the profound and irreversible consequences of his terrifying journey along the rails.
All the evidence, the new evidence, and the evidence that my trial lawyers in that time didn't present, it shows that I did not kill anybody.
A brutal murder, a controversial trial, a man sentenced to die. On February 5th, 2025, Stephen LaWayne Nelson was executed in Texas for the 2011 killing of a pastor. But was justice truly served? Or was this a case riddled with unresolved questions? Let's break it all down.
Nelson was sentenced to death for killing a Baptist pastor from Arlington named Clint Dobson.
It all started on March 3rd, 2011, at North Point Baptist Church in Arlington, Texas. Reverend Clint Dobson and his assistant were attacked in what authorities described as a botched robbery. Clint was brutally beaten, choked, and suffocated with a plastic bag. His assistant survived, but barely.
He recently married while on death row to Helene Noah Dubois, who connected with Nelson via an inmate letter writing program in 2020.
Despite Nelson maintaining his innocence, the prosecution presented evidence tying him to the crime. Fingerprints, stolen property, and testimony placed him at the scene. But there was something controversial. Texas's law of parties rule, which allows people to be sentenced for a crime even if they didn't commit the actual murder.
All the evidence, the new evidence, and the evidence that my trial lawyers in that time didn't present, it shows that I did not kill anybody.
Stephen Nelson was convicted based on circumstantial evidence and the testimony of witnesses who later changed their statements. Some argue the prosecution was more focused on getting a conviction than uncovering the truth.
Told me not to testify because during that trial, They only did surface stuff. They didn't investigate my other two co-defendants. They didn't investigate anything.
There were multiple unresolved issues in Nelson's case. Key pieces of evidence were missing, and the court dismissed testimonies that could have exonerated him. Despite this, his execution proceeded. As the execution date neared, protests erupted. Advocates claimed Nelson's trial was unfair, and key evidence had been ignored. But the state of Texas moved forward. On February 5th, 2025, Nelson was scheduled to die. On February 5th, 2025, at Huntsville State Penitentiary, Nelson's final words were, "Let's ride, Warden." Within minutes, lethal chemicals were administered, and he was pronounced dead.
Stephen LaWayne Nelson, 37, said, "Let's ride, Warden," before he was pronounced dead at 6:50 p.m. in Huntsville, Texas on Wednesday, after refusing to walk into the chamber.
Yes, thanks for asking. Yeah, Noah, his wife, was there, and there were certainly witnesses there for the victim's family. I just don't know, I wasn't able to tell who they were.
In his last moments, Nelson showed no fear, no apology. His execution marked the first in Texas for 2025, but the debate over his guilt and the fairness of his sentence continues.
"I'm not scared. It's cold as in here, but I'm at peace. I'm ready to be at home," Stephen said.
Religious leaders, activists, and legal experts have questioned whether capital punishment is truly effective in serving justice. Nelson's execution reignited debates about the fairness of the system, especially for those convicted under the law of parties.
We're better than this. We don't have to do this. The state of Texas is not going to be any better having killed Stephen Nelson.
So, was justice truly served? Was Stephen Nelson a brutal murderer, or was he wrongfully executed under a flawed justice system? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. In Houston, a routine jog turned into a decades-long fight for justice. One mother lost her life, a family was shattered, and a killer spent nearly 30 years on death row. Arthur Lee Burton, convicted of the 1997 murder of Nancy Adelman, a mother of 3, faced execution after a lengthy legal battle. The horrific nature of the crime and its drawn-out aftermath shocked the community and the Natio.
The U.S. Supreme Court is denying a stay for a Texas death row inmate set to be executed tonight.
It's for a murder that happened in Houston back in 1997.
A Texas death row inmate is set to be executed for a murder that happened in Houston back in 1997.
Arthur Burton has twice been sentenced to death for the 1997 murder of Nancy Adelman.
A peaceful evening jog turned fatal in the blink of an eye. Nancy Adelman didn't know that Arthur Lee Burton had been watching. Her final moments were filled with terror and unexpected grace. On July 19, 1997, Nancy went jogging along White Oak Bayou. She was rehearsing lines for her one-woman church play. Burton, riding his bicycle, spotted her, attacked from behind, and dragged her into the woods. Though he claimed to be too nervous to complete the rape, he beat and strangled her with her own shoelaces. In her final words, Nancy forgave him, asking if he knew God.
And drags her into the woods and proceeds to choke her out till the time she becomes unconscious.
Decades passed. Time didn't erase the crime, only deepened the questions. Burton's legal team argued he was intellectually disabled. Would it be enough to spare his life? Burton spent over 27 years on death row. He filed appeal after appeal. In 2001, he even received a new punishment trial due to ineffective counsel. But in the end, the courts ruled he was competent, and the Supreme Court rejected his final attempt to delay execution.
Burton did file a last-minute appeal claiming he had an intellectual disability. The Supreme Court rejected that appeal.
The clock was ticking. In just hours, the state of Texas would put an end to a case that had haunted so many. With less than 2 hours to live, Arthur Lee Burton remained on death watch in Huntsville. The final legal avenues had closed. Wednesday evening in Huntsville, justice, according to Texas, was served, but the pain of loss and the weight of justice could still be felt in the room. At 6:23 p.m., Burton was injected. At 6:48 p.m., he was pronounced dead. Nancy's family, her husband, son, and brother, were there, silently witnessing the moment. Burton apologized but never admitted guilt. Prosecutors and officials stood alongside the family, affirming the justice served after nearly 3 decades.
At 6:47 p.m., the state of Texas carried out the execution of Arthur Lee Burton.
Some saw closure, others questions. The case reignited debate over justice, forgiveness, and the death penalty itself. Community members, shaken by the brutality of the crime, expressed relief that the case was finally over. But others raised concerns about the long appeals process, the cost, and the role of forgiveness in justice. Nancy's act of grace, her final words of forgiveness, still lingers in hearts and headlines.
In the case that left many women around Houston concerned about walking outside alone.
What is it like to watch a life end legally? For the victims' families and for the witnesses, the experience stays with them forever. Nancy's family remained silent after witnessing Burton's death. Her husband, son, and brother were there. Prosecutor Kim Ogg stood beside them. Burton's own brother also attended, offering no comment. The silence afterward said more than any word ever could.
He said he was sorry, but he did not admit on the gurney as to what he did.
Arthur Lee Burton's execution closes a tragic chapter, but the echoes of Nancy Adelman's life, her forgiveness, and her family's endurance resonate long after. Justice may have been served by law, but true resolution remains something only time and love can offer. In the heart of small-town Texas, a grandmother with a tragic past became the center of one of America's most chilling true crime stories. Betty Lou Beets wasn't just another woman with a rough life. She became known as the Black Widow of Henderson County. Accused of killing not one, but 2 of her husbands and burying them in her backyard, her case would lead to a death sentence, a national media firestorm, and decades of fierce debate. Was she a cold-blooded killer or a battered woman pushed past the brink?
Betty Lou knew she could get a man to do whatever she wanted, and when that wasn't enough, she just got another one.
She was executed for killing her 5th husband, Jimmy Don Beets.
Beets was found guilty and sentenced to death in 1985, but the long appeals process meant that the method of lethal injection wasn't carried out until 15 years later.
Betty Lou's life had been marred by abuse and poverty from the very beginning, but it was the murder of her 5th husband, Jimmy Don Beets, that ultimately sealed her fate. In 1983, she reported him missing from a fishing trip, but what police couldn't find in the lake, they eventually uncovered in her yard. His body was buried beneath a wishing well, the very one Jimmy Don had built for her. Even more shocking, a second body, her 4th husband, Doyle Wayne Barker, was found buried in the garage, with her own children turning against her in court, testifying that she orchestrated the killings and even asked for their help hiding the bodies. The case against Betty Lou became airtight. Prosecutors argued she killed for financial gain, insurance money, and retirement benefits. And the jury agreed. They found the remains of Jimmy Beets inside, and in the garage, the remains of her fourth husband, Doyle Wayne Barker. Behind bars, Betty Lou maintained her innocence, claiming she was a victim of domestic violence and manipulated by her children's testimonies. Legal advocates argued that her trial was unfair. Her defense attorney allegedly pressured her into signing away her story rights for a book and movie deal. Appeals cited ineffective counsel, lack of evidence for premeditation, and her history of trauma. Still, court after court upheld the conviction.
At her trial, Betty Lou's disdain for her husband's poured out of her. It was revealed she shot her second husband after an argument and tried to run over husband number 3.
After 15 years on death row, Betty Lou Beets faced her final days. Despite continued support from anti-death penalty advocates and appeals reaching as high as the Supreme Court, the state of Texas stood firm. The date was set. The clock was ticking. February 24th, 2000. At the Huntsville unit in Texas, Betty Lou Beets made no final meal request. She also refused to give a final statement. For a woman at the center of so much controversy, she met her death in utter silence. Outside the prison walls, the sons of the murdered men watched. One of them, Jamie Beets, told CBS, "I saw my dad's face. I knew that he was smiling. It was over now." At 6:18 p.m., Betty Lou was pronounced dead by lethal injection. She was 62 years old. The execution of Betty Lou Beets ignited national debate. Feminist groups and anti-death penalty advocates condemned the state, arguing that trauma, abuse, and inadequate legal defense were ignored. Others saw justice, delivered late but necessary. Her case remains a touchstone in discussions about how courts treat battered women and whether justice truly accounts for context.
But the long appeals process meant that the method of lethal injection wasn't carried out until 15 years later.
For those who watched the execution, it was deeply emotional. Jamie Beets didn't see a killer. He saw his father's story ending. Others saw the silencing of a woman they believed never had a fair chance to speak. In that sterile chamber behind a glass wall, the story of Betty Lou Beets ended not with screams or sobs, but with stillness. Betty Lou Beets' life was a mosaic of trauma, choices, and consequences. Her case forces us to examine the justice system's ability to balance past abuse with present crimes. Whether you see her as a murderer or a misunderstood woman failed by the system, her story leaves a lasting question. Can justice ever truly be blind if it doesn't see the whole story? In the quiet town of Jasper, Texas, a crime so brutal shook the nation to its core. It would become a defining moment in the fight against hate crimes in America, putting 3 men on trial and 2 on death row. James Byrd Jr., a 49-year-old black man, was chained to a pickup truck and dragged for nearly 3 miles by white supremacists. His murder wasn't just a local tragedy, it ignited a national reckoning.
A black man dragged to death, chained to the back of a pickup truck in Jasper, Texas.
James Byrd, just like Matthew Shepard, are the iconic victims of hate crime. Most Americans know their names.
On June 7th, 1998, 3 men stopped to offer James Byrd Jr. a ride. It was the start of a horrific plan. This wasn't just murder. It was a racial hate crime carried out with chilling cruelty, leading to new hate crime. John William King, Lawrence Russell Brewer, and Sean Berry were all convicted. Brewer and King, both avowed white supremacists, chained Byrd to their truck and dragged him to his death. The crime shocked the conscience of the nation. King's role as the ringleader sealed his fate. Death row.
They chained Byrd to the back of their truck and dragged him 3 miles down a deserted road, then dumped.
While the world moved on, the men behind the crime sat behind bars, waiting. Years on death row gave Brewer and King time, but also drew attention, protests, and controversy. Brewer gave a rare prison interview expressing no remorse. His final days were spent writing letters and meeting family. King, on the other hand, stayed silent, offering no apologies. Legal appeals were exhausted. The clock was ticking.
No regrets, no. I have no regrets. No, I'll do it all over again.
The final day arrived. One more signature would seal Brewer's fate. Decades after the murder, justice, however defined, was about to be carried out. Families on both sides prepared. The Byrd family gathered in remembrance. The world watched Huntsville, where the Walls unit would host Texas's next execution. Brewer's final moments were set. 6:21 p.m., lethal injection. Would he show remorse? Would the Byrd family find closure? Lawrence Brewer had requested a massive final meal, but didn't touch it. That led Texas to abolish last meal privileges. King's execution proceeded with quiet determination. Byrd's sisters witnessed it. A state senator reminded the public, privileges shouldn't be granted where none were given to the victim.
2 chicken fried steaks, a triple meat bacon cheeseburger, 3 fajitas, a pizza meat lover special, a pint of Bluebell homemade vanilla ice cream, and 3 root beers. But we're told by prison officials in the end that he refused the meal, telling officials that he was not hungry.
The aftermath wasn't just legal, it was cultural. Brewer's gluttonous meal triggered outrage. King's silence drew scorn. Texas's death row policy changed. After Brewer's untouched feast, Texas banned last meals. King's case reignited debates over capital punishment, racial justice, and reconciliation. Public vigils, protests, and legislation followed, showing how one act of cruelty could reshape law and public discourse.
Texas will no longer offer death row inmates a special last meal. They just get what everyone else is going to eat.
But what is justice without witness? The people who were there saw more than death. They saw the human cost. Family members of James Byrd Jr. watched Brewer die. Some protested Brewer's execution, believing hate shouldn't be repaid with death. Even former law enforcement struggled with the burden of witnessing a man's final breath. The trauma endured long after the sentence was carried out.
Among those witnessing the execution were Luvon Harris and Clara Taylor, who are sisters of James Byrd Jr., as well as Tiffany Taylor, James Byrd Jr.'s niece. On Brewer's side, his mother Helen, his father Lawrence Sr., his brother John, and 2 friends were present. We're told by prison officials that Brewer spent the day writing, packing personal belongings, and visiting with his loved ones.
In the end, what remains is more than a headline or legal case. It's a reminder of what hate can do and of what justice demands. James Byrd Jr.'s name lives on, not only in memory, but in legislation, community, and a hard-earned national conscience. The road to healing is long, but paved by those brave enough to remember.